This is Molly McCammon. I'm director of the Alaska Ocean Observing System based here in Anchorage. I'm also one of the co-team leads of the Environmental Intelligence IARPC Collaboration Team. This meeting actually started as the result of a conversation with Emily Osborne and Roberto Delgado, our other co-team leads, talking about what the Environmental Intelligence Team should be looking at this coming year and what we should do as priorities for our actions. And it became clear that the big issue was Bering Sea ice extent conditions, kind of the changes, the really abnormally low ice conditions in the Bering Sea, and that this topic also overlapped with a number of the other collaboration teams, such as the Sea Ice team, the Marine Ecosystems team, the Coastal Resilience team. And we thought it would be really useful to have all of us get together and to have a community roundtable discussion about these low ice conditions, and then talk about how all of the IARPC collaboration teams can act together in a more coordinated fashion to facilitate community-wide interaction around these kind of major events. And how do we help influence research needs, monitoring needs, and what action needs to happen this coming year and into the future, kind of based on that discussion. So this was, everyone agreed to this. So we set up this time. We really want to hear from the communities in the region. So I hope we do get some of that participation today and can hear some feedback from folks there. But first we asked Rick Toman to give an overview of all of the current extent and conditions and kind of set that baseline knowledge base of where things are right now. So I'm going to turn it over to Rick Toman now.
Okay, hi everyone, this is Rick. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, let's see if we can make the technology work. Can you see my slides?
Yep, look good.
Okay. Okay, Meredith said she's going to be quite the taskmaster here, so no monkeying around. Bering Sea Ice update. So where we're at, the 1-minute review of the season started out, of course, very low ice conditions in the fall. Sea surface temperatures extremely warm during last summer and last autumn. And from the NSIDC passive microwave database, November had the lowest average ice extent in the 41-year record. Weather pattern changed for December and through the first half of January, with the atmosphere conducive to actually colder than normal conditions. So seasonably cold type weather, a lot of northerly winds over the Bering Sea. And ice grew fairly rapidly in the northern Bering Sea, faster than the previous winter. And the slide on the left-hand side there shows about the maximum extent. This is the National Weather Service's Alaska Sea Ice Program high-resolution analysis. And you can see January 26th, we had some ice into upper Bristol Bay, to south of Nunivak Island, just about to St. Matthew Island, and then west to the coast. Then the last week in January, as everyone on this call knows, dramatic change in the weather pattern to extreme storminess, or I should say persistent storminess. 15 separate storms affected western Alaska and the Bering Sea from the last week in January through February, and the result is in the middle panel there. So by early March 4th, there is almost no ice left. In Norton Sound, almost no ice left, really much south of the Bering Strait, except along the Russian coast. Starting the second week in March, Somewhat of a weather pattern change, cooler, not cold, but for the season by any means. But just looking at the analysis on the right-hand side, you can see quite an expansion of ice, relatively speaking. But that ice is, especially east of St. Lawrence Island, is entirely new after the 4th there. So all of that ice, less than 3 weeks old. This is the analysis as of Saturday. In the face of the ongoing storminess, return of storminess, ice is already being lost in the Bering Sea. So Saturday it's going to be something like it's the maximum regrowth. Here's the daily plot from the NSIDC passive microwave database, and you can see that we were, except for last year, is the only marginally close analog, and the green line, which is this year, is about to turn the corner and head back down here in a big, and I expect in a big way here over the coming week. For those that prefer the mazy look, so this is the operational multi-sensor high-resolution view. This is a similar plot to the last one, except I don't run it out the whole season here just to take advantage of the higher resolution. Same color scheme, green is this year, red is last year. And you can see this only goes back to 2006-07, but quite a bit lower than any other year, except last year, where the phase is off a little bit in the dips and rises, but far, far below normal. So I mentioned that new ice. Here is the SMOS sea ice thickness. So SMOS is very good at or what we have for thin sea ice. So less than half a meter, color bar there in the bottom left-hand side. And you can see from Saturday's SMOS that ice, generally, there is ice, but generally less than 10 centimeters thick, according to the SMOS. Over the whole eastern Bering Sea, most of Norton Sound there. There is some thicker ice on the north side of St. Lawrence Island there, extending to the Bering Strait, and then in the Gulf of Anadyr, somewhat thicker ice. But obviously, SMOS has, of course, does have issues, doesn't account for fractional ice cover, and can be contaminated by water on the surface. But in any case, in this case, it comports with what we know, that eastern Bering Sea ice has to be all 3 weeks old or less, so it can't be very thick. South of the ice edge, sea surface temperatures are very warm, with temperatures generally 1 to better than 2 degrees C above normal in most of the Bering Sea for the 10 days ending on Friday, and really pretty, and that's of course the same story that we've been talking about for years now with the Bering Sea, if you will, perpetually warm. Diomede on the 1st, that's what I got for you. Take any questions. Hello, anybody there?
I think Rick is asking for questions from anybody on the conference call here. I think everybody is stunned, Rick.
There you go.
This is John Walsh. Could I ask a question about that period of enhanced storminess, which seems to be the key to the real loss? Is there any linkage to the El Nino, Madden-Julian oscillation? Any linkage to the big picture that we can use to explain that that abrupt retreat in February?
So yeah, so that's the million-dollar question. So starting in late January was a more enhanced phase of MJO, and that's probably part of it. And the El Nino signal was really kicking in February. Of course, El Nino is not necessarily correlated with storminess in the western Bering Sea. Typically, we would expect to see the storm track farther east. And I do want to, I didn't have the time to go into the attribution here, But while it was extremely stormy, it's not unprecedented. February 1999 was similarly stormy in the Bering Sea, and by some measures, at least, possibly even stormier. So unusual, unprecedented.
Hey, Rick, this is Janet in Trary. I'm wondering, given that the Bering is always first-year ice, how thick was it less thick this year than other years before it got blown to shreds, and how thick would that be normally?
Yeah, that's a good question, Janet, and I actually don't remember, but surely it must have been extremely thin, and I think we're seeing the impact of those very warm sea surface temperatures so the ice was able to form. So just the extent product, yes or no, showed decent ice, but it was pretty thick. And I should point out too, even along the Norton Sound coast, we were hearing from folks that, in January, yes, it's cold, it's 30 below, but the ice seems to be less robust than their experience would suggest based on the temperatures and how long it had been cold. And my hypothesis is that we're seeing the effects there of the very warm sea surface temperatures at the start of the winter.
And I guess, thank you for that. I guess my follow-up question is, do you think that with the enhanced wave energy from the storms that it was bringing up heat from below?
Oh, that surely must, the wave action, the mixing in the upper ocean, all must have been important players. Should point out too, in 1989, the closest atmospheric analog to this, we also lost a very large amount of Bering Sea. Actually, in square kilometers is actually more than this year. But of course, it was starting out from a far higher value. So it did not drop, but nearly the total extent. But certainly, 15 storms in 40 days is going to chew up a lot of ice in the Bering Sea.
And Rick, this is Gay. I was just also wanting to comment that with the long duration of south winds that we had, we were getting flooding events. So we were getting these storm surges, which we would normally never even think of such a thing in Norton Sound or the Bering Strait region in February. And it was actually cracking the ice, right? It was lifting up shore fast ice and popping it. So we had in southern Norton Sound, in Norton Sound on the north shore, because of the southerly winds, we had ice that was basically just being held in place and being broken. It looked like it was there, right? But it didn't take but a calm day for that ice to disintegrate once that south wind gave up. So I don't know if that plays a role as well, but that storm surge events that we were getting that we wouldn't normally get were really helping to make the ice very mobile.
Yeah, very much so. Of course, this year flooding at Kotlik, February 12th and 13th, just like Diomede last year, utterly unprecedented. No community memory of any such event at this time of year.
So are there any other questions for Rick? And if questions do come up, we can always bring them up later during the discussion period. So, so we're going to go next to hear from the community's perspectives, needs, observations. Gay, Sheffield, you were going to lead this off?
Sure. I don't know how many communities we have online. Do you, at your end with all the...
I don't know. Do you have, Meredith? Can you tell?
I can't tell exactly. We have had some people join the call since we were on the roll call. So I'll just ask now if there are any either those from the Sea Ice for Walrus Outlook or members of Arctic communities or Bering communities that are on the line.
Yeah, I don't see any, but it's hard to tell for sure.
Okay, well, in that case, I don't speak on behalf of any of the Bering Strait communities other than as my role as a Sea Grant agent. And I think you have me down here for needs, perspectives, and observations. So if it's helpful, I guess I'll start with need. And the need is for a little stability. We have environmental stability. We have, oops, I hear some background, but.
Welcome. Enter your meeting. Follow.
Anyway, I'll keep going. So some stability would be good environmentally. We have in front of us, well, I don't know of everyone on this call, so I live in Nome. My name is Gay Sheffield. I'm with UAF Alaska Sea Grant. And in the Bering Strait region, the subsistence harvest or the non-commercial acquisition of marine resources is essential to our 20 tribes' nutritional, cultural, and economic needs. So we are going into the spring. Normally, people in the region would be gearing up for, well, people would be actively crabbing on the sea ice, fishing for small forage fish, and starting the spring hunt for the marine mammals, both seals and whales. And it would really get into it in April, May, and June. That is what those are the big months for gathering the food that you will be storing for much of the year and feeding your community and your family with. So right now we have, as those pictures show, we have a loss of habitat and a lot of questions. And people are trying to do the best they can, because even though this is rather dramatic, the need to bring in some resources to feed your family and your community, that doesn't stop. So people are having to make choices. I do want to, under, I guess, perspectives, kind of highlight some of the concerns and some of the impacts. So on the human side, we lost our ice here in front of Nome to the beach March 10th. It went out. And it wasn't a windy day, and we had a snowmobile race that's about 200 miles long, starts in Nome, ends in Nome, goes east to White Mountain, most of it on land, some of it on ice, and within 2 hours of the racers, the last racer returning, the ice that they were on was gone. That sort of caught us all by surprise and was potentially, it was very dangerous conditions, and nobody, we just never thought of it, that in the first week of March, our ice would be gone to the beach. So the shore fast ice was not shore fast, even in the shallow sandy waters of Nome. We have earlier in the season lost one elder through the ice. He was on a four-wheeler, was able to call his family from being in the hole, but by the time people could get to him, he was not found and still is not found. Presumed lost. We've lost 2 men going through the ice on the lower Kuskokwim River. We have an active search and rescue, which is now a search and recovery for 2 men in some of this storm condition that left from a community trying to get to Nome and have not made it. So the impacts are real, both from a human life impact, from concern about food. For the storm period that Rick was talking about, from late January to basically the 3rd week of February, it was incredible for our region to just have, we're good at storms, but every 3 days, every other day, one would meld into the other. I'd love to see how many days we were sort of consecutively in a storm warning. What that meant for our outlying, Nome is the transportation hub, and we have many, many outlying communities. And if you can imagine, people's medical appointments, their paychecks, their food deliveries were not happening. They had to stay in place, or I guess you guys would call it shelter in place, for up to 12 days. So that meant people who needed elderly people or young babies who needed to get to Nome for medical appointments could not. Food could not get delivered, and any of the necessary paperwork that you need in your life, like paychecks or tax forms or whatever it is, letters from loved ones, those all had to be on hold. And there's a big backlog underway. As far as observations, animal movements, of course, the ice is the habitat for many of our ice-associated animals like bowhead and beluga whales, very high-end subsistence resources, as well as the bearded seal, which is a staple, and the 3 other species of seals, ringed, spotted, and ribbon, all utilized in this region. The movements of animals, walrus are highly visible because they're out on the ice, and walrus movements have been very unusual. When the pictures of the ice where it took the big dip in February, we had very large storms, and walruses were entering the southern Chukchi Sea in numbers. So this is highly unusual because we don't normally have open water for walruses to come up here this early. So it was the breeding season as well. Walrus breed between December and March, so they're not in their normal area. They're having to get moving up into the southern Chukchi, and I'm sure things got a little, normally they form these lek systems, but they find themselves underway trying to get out of big waves, big storms, and so I have no idea what the impact on that is. With the situation that we currently have, and I'll just say our current weather conditions, we have a 948 millibar low that's starting to come in from the south. It will, I don't know, Rick, if you're going to show your movie where it shows that the movement of that low straight into the Gulf of Anadyr and sort of the northwest Bering Sea, which will probably take out that remaining ice and move the ice that we have had return right back up to the north. It's currently 33 degrees here, and they're telling us to expect a 2 to 4 foot storm surge on top of normal high tide. So this will be very interesting for Nome since we are facing south and there is loose ice. This will be novel and hopefully just an interesting storm to see. Seabirds are in the area where they would not normally be. Again, they're following the ice edge, just like any good seabird would in the winter. So the effects of that we have yet to be seen. We are anticipating no thermal barrier again. No, I think in the science world it's called the cold pool, separating the southern Bering Sea from the northern Bering Sea ecosystem. Last year was the first time in 38 years of looking that NOAA was not able to, and other researchers were not able to find this thermal barrier that separates these two distinct ecosystems. And as a result, we've seen just in the last year or so, a pretty formidable seabird, multi-species seabird die-off in the region. These are also very important subsistence species like murres. We've seen very unusual fish movements of 5,000% increase in the biomass of pollock, 2,000% increase in the biomass of Pacific cod. These are large predatory fish that prey upon small fatty forage fish, for which the northern Bering Sea ecosystem used to excel at making, and those small fatty forage fish would feed the seabirds and our subadult seals, as well as many, many other things. So we're anticipating, we're hoping for the best, but I think we realistically have to look at what happens when you are merging two ecosystems. We're worried about harmful algal blooms with the increased temperature. We have no idea when you remove the ice how the pupping season will fare. The pups will come out whether they're in water or ice, but survival could be very interesting for our 4 ice-associated seals, which are ring seals have begun pupping right about now, so it should be interesting. And I won't even say, it should be interesting to see how that resolves itself. And then walruses, of course, will start pupping in May, and hopefully there's a platform for them as well. Subsistence harvest, of course, is an unknown. People are gathering foods now when they wouldn't normally be out because they are adapting and adaptive and responsive and trying to take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves. Currently, there are walruses being harvested. The return of the ice to St. Lawrence Island has allowed some access to the animals, and that has been really great. We're wondering about commercial fishing industry. The arrival of that, we did have our first longline cod processor catcher boat in Nome, November 9th at the dock. Both of those events are novel. One, that the Port of Nome is open, actually with open water November 9th, and that we would have a commercial fishing boat from afar that come because they were fishing closer to Nome than St. Paul and had to get some business done on shore. That was a sort of a novel wow. And that's about it. Last but not least, I guess you've all been watching the Norwegian cruise ship incident where they were trying to rescue something like 1,300 people off a cruise ship with 5 helicopters, and I think they did a great job of taking care of that. But I think there's a lot about that incident that might be applicable or open our eyes here in the Bering Strait region. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Gay. Molly and Meredith, I'm not sure if our community invited participants are going to make it. It is the start of a workday for both of them, and it's very hard for them to prioritize a call like this, so it's possible that something might have come up. So I'll keep a lookout on the participants list to see if they do join in and invite them to present, but I'll open up the floor for questions, I suppose.
Thanks, Olivia. It's also possible they're preparing for the next storm. So
Exactly.
that very well could be. So does anyone have questions for Gay? And you can either unmute your microphone, or you could also chat, type something in the chat. Okay, well, why don't we move on? And I think the next thing, if Robert Takina.
Oh, we do have a question.
Okay, there's a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, could we go back? We've been having technical, this is Phyllis, Jim Overland and Carol Ladd. But anyway, we were having technical problems with the first discussion and we couldn't get anything to work. And so I just wanted to make a comment about the temperatures you're seeing on the southern Bering Sea shelf in the middle. We had an instrument near St. Matt's. Bottom temperatures at St. Matt never got below about 1 degree. They're warming right now, and surface temperatures are above 2 degrees. So the area around St. Matt, which is usually the northern Bering Sea, is very warm this year. It's comparable to last year. And so, it's even if the winds turn around, it's going to be hard for ice to go very far south. The ice never reached where this particular mooring was. So the other thing is the temperatures are below 2 in several places, so we will have a cold pool for a while. We had a cold pool last year until early August. But when the surveys went out, the cold pool had warmed above it, but it was below 2 degrees over certainly half of the shelf into the summer. But we had a lot of vertical mixing, of warming of heat down to the bottom. So we'll have a cold pool for a while, but from the looks of it, it's going to disappear again probably in August. That's it.
Yeah, and this is Jim Overland. I have a comment on John Walsh's question about the larger weather context. There was a blocking in the jet stream over North America that held the storm track over the Bering for so long. So there was a larger scale connection to why this had so many storms one after another. It was part of a larger pattern.
So Jim, this is Molly. Is that kind of that larger scale pattern, is that unusual, or is that something that we might see more frequently or unknown?
I think my answer over a beer is yes, but the scientific credibility is there's not enough information yet. But we see the polar vortex moving over Greenland, and that blocks the flow of the jet stream all the way. It backs everything up all the way to eastern Siberia. And we saw that last year, and we're seeing it again this year. So 2 in a row, I think, is some information that we should see. And we certainly know that over the last decade, the polar vortex has weakened, and that allows it to move around over Europe with the beast from the east, and then over Greenland, and rather than just sitting over the North Pole like it used to.
Certainly the wind patterns, since about 2016, we have gotten more periods of winds out of the south during the ice season, November through March. Al Herman has done some work, modeling work, and it shows in the long run that we will get more southerlies, but it certainly wasn't a sudden shift to extreme conditions. It was kind of a more gradual occurrence over the next decade or two.
I mean, last year we thought everything was just so unusual it would never happen again.
Yeah, we don't want to say that anymore, I guess.
So this is Gay. I've got a small comment on that, if it's helpful.
Go ahead, Gay.
So I was at Diomede recently in January, and well, I should say, and I was talking to people in February, and they were saying, gosh, it seems like we've really surprised a lot of people with this open water. And I said, well, yeah, were you guys not, I mean, you guys were expecting it? And they said, well, we were happy to see the ice come down, but it was basically crap for ice, I think is the quote. And so the ice is not very strong. When you're making your models, are you guys taking that into consideration, the thickness of the ice or the quality of the ice? Is that something that you're able to capture so that I mean, 2 years in a row, we've gotten kind of stunned up here. But now it seems like people sort of anticipated that we didn't anticipate that big chunk of southerly winds, but if you have bad ice, that's what it's going to take to eat up what you've got. But is ice thickness quality something that goes into the model?
It comes out of the model,
Okay.
but we're still trying to look at. We have a number of instruments now that measure ice thickness, and one of our goals is to do a comparison between those instruments and what the models are predicting. The models do come out with a prediction of ice thickness.
Okay.
Not quality of ice, but just the thickness. Certainly, when you have really warm temperatures and you get strong winds out of the north, you make kind of thin ice. And historically, it's been continuous winds out of the north, and so the ice slowly thickens and wraps and everything. But these periods, month-long periods, where the average winds are out of the south, is causing havoc with ice formation.
Well,
Oh, go ahead.
Warmer temperatures and less ice means there's more energy given from the ocean up to all those storms coming up, and makes the storms stronger than they used to be when there was a lot of ice that they had to go over.
Right, and then the breaking of the ice with these storm surges. I mean, it looks in those National Weather Service maps, the red area looks like, gee whiz, it's nice and solid 9/10 ice. But I'll tell you, it's pretty different when it's already been broken once. If you know what I mean, it's not a nice refreeze. It's pretty weak, easy to crumble again. Just a thought.
Yeah, you can call that a positive feedback, where once it gets going, it just makes the whole thing stronger.
So Jim and Phyllis and Janet, is there any relationship at all to warmer temperatures in the Southern Pacific as well? Because I know they had a number of large storms there too. Is there a relationship there? Are we seeing a new hurricane season, but for our region instead of the Atlantic and the Gulf?
Historically, and this is the problem, is this pattern has occurred now for a few years, but historically there's never been a correlation between ice extent in the Bering Sea and like ENSO, except when you have extremely strong ENSOs, then you tend to have a little bit of delay of ice, it looks like. But weak ENSO, weak El Niños have never had an influence on the southern Bering Sea. Are they having an influence now? I don't know. The shifting of things, the storms that are coming out of the south and going into the Bering Sea and breaking the ice and pushing it north, has happened before, but not with the regularity that is happening right now.
Well, and this year compared to last year, there's warmer temperatures in the North Pacific, and those warmer temperatures help lock in this blocking jet stream pattern. So I'm sort of calling that what's happening over Greenland and what's happening over the North Pacific are helping to lock in the weather pattern over the Bering Sea, especially the storm track.
Really, the only difference between this year and last year is last year in November, at the beginning of the ice season, there were strong winds out of the south, and that's what prevented there not being any significant ice in December and January of last year. This year, the winds in November, December were very strong out of the north, so you began a regular ice season. And then, the late January, February, March event happened.
Yeah, the other thing we're seeing is that there's something really weird going on in February. When we look for this particular jet stream blocking pattern, we see that more in the last 15 years, where we don't see anything unusual in January or March. So, but that's, as Rick says, that's all kind of woo-woo stuff.
So I think on the agenda, we had a few brief updates from some folks that were contacted about giving us some talks here. Is there anyone online who's prepared to do that?
I think Dave Douglas might be on the phone. I'm sorry to call anyone out who's not prepared to speak. There might be some others too.
Hi, yeah, this is Dave Douglas. I'm on the phone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Well, yeah, I could speak to a couple of studies that I've been involved with, and one would be on behalf of George DeVoke, who has studied the black gilliman.
Dave, can you first tell people who you are and who you're with?
Oh, sure. Well, yeah, my name is Dave Douglas, and I'm with the U.S. Geological Survey Alaska Science Center. So I'm a wildlife biologist, and I've been collaborating with people at our science center, looking at the sort of the role of sea ice dynamics and how that influences the sea ice dependent populations we study, which have included polar bears and walruses and some seabirds. And in the Bering Sea, then, speaking to the seabirds, I've had the opportunity to collaborate with George Devoke, who's studied the excuse me, black guillemots up on Cooper Island near Utqiagvik for a long time, 35 years or more. And it's interesting that in 2016 or 17, after the unusual low sea ice concentrations in the Bering Sea where these birds go to winter, when he went out to study the colony in the next summer, there was very poor survival of those birds. Very few came back. The ones that did come back to the colony, few laid eggs, and there was just a very poor reproductive year the next year, as well as poor overwinter survival. He attributes that, to the really unusual low sea ice conditions, the lack of the cold pool, and perhaps their preferred prey, which is the Arctic cod. And so, it's just a place marker that, there's a very, it was profound mortality. It was over half the population didn't return. And now we're seeing another unusual, at least, sea ice event in February. And so time will tell when he goes out this year to see how many return. And so I'll mention another study I was involved with Paul Flint, who's with our Science Center, and Katie Christie, who's an affiliate, I think, with the Alaska Sea Life Center. And she was looking at some of the modeling with the spectacled sea eider, which Paul Flint had earlier published that overwinter survival of the spectacled sea eider, was that overwinter survival was lower in years of really dense sea ice on their wintering ground, which seems to have a high fidelity for areas southwest of St. Lawrence Island. They seem to really prefer that area and return back there year after year. And what Katie Christie did in her study was to update the data sets, number of years of survival, and she found that if she applied a nonlinear function to that survival model, that there was also an indication that the eiders didn't do as well in low sea ice years. So, in other words, too much sea ice or too little sea ice on that area southwest of St. Lawrence Island seemed to have an influence on the spectacled eiders' overwinter survival. And so now we've seen two years, certainly 2017 and now the 18-19 winter with low sea ice in that area. It certainly raises concern or it would be good to monitor those populations and watch for perhaps an impact in population numbers during these unusual sea ice winters, just to get a heads up and a handle on some forecasting into the future if these odd years become the new normal.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions.
Okay. If there's anyone else who wants to join in, but where Olivia Lee is now scheduled to talk about the state of the science, so maybe we'll just go to that, and then anyone with other observations they want to make or join in there. So Olivia, why don't we turn it over to you?
So the idea for the next couple of sections is for us to be able to generate some discussion around some key questions, and a few questions are put up there on the agenda and are on your screen as well. And the first one sort of focusing on science needs to help inform future predictions and forecasts based on our current understanding too of what the new normal might be for the Bering Sea region. Do we have sufficient observations ongoing, and are there potential ways to improve research coordination efforts both for this upcoming field season and for future years? So again, we don't have to focus our discussion on these questions specifically, but the idea was to provide some time right now focusing on the science and potentially also the observing effort for what we might need to do both this season and in future years, and see if there's ways to improve some of our coordination efforts. So if anyone has anything to add or can perhaps answer any of these questions, or might have other questions that they want to throw out to the floor, opening it up.
And thank you, Olivia. And I just wanted to go ahead and credit Gay Sheffield with coming up with this list of questions that we're going to be discussing. And the idea hopefully is to each of these sections here on the agenda come up with an action item, or maybe a couple, but an action item for each section for these collaboration teams moving forward.
Yeah, this is Janet and Trary, and just a comment to maybe get us started is, and Molly kind of brought this up earlier, about the state of the predictions right now, and the current the operational model that NOAA uses is an atmosphere only, is the kind of the weather prediction model. And so we're just beginning to work on the larger global coupled model, and getting back to what Gay said about, well, how is sea ice thickness incorporated, or is it? And what the future holds is that it will be incorporated. It's a little bit more important for the pack ice, given that the first year ice is thin enough. But once you incorporate waves, the effect of the atmosphere to create the waves, the coupling to the ocean that's holding the heat in the mixed layer and below the mixed layer to bring that heat up, and then how the sea ice is reacting to both the atmosphere and the ocean energy exchanges is kind of the next step for the prediction capability. Some models already do this. We run a regional model that does that in an experimental mode, but other places like Environment Canada already runs a fully coupled global model that does data assimilate sea ice thickness. So I think that in terms of the physical parameters, having as close of initial conditions for ice extent and thickness and sea surface temperature, in addition to all of the atmospheric parameters, is what the path forward is going to have. And obviously, validating that against observations is one of the more important parts, so we understand how the energy exchanges are being captured and if they're being captured correctly. So that's just a comment on the sort of the state of the modeling.
So Janet, just to follow up on that, does that mean, are there adequate resources that are going into developing that coupled model?
Well, the new NOAA Unified Forecast System, which is the UFS, is kind of the Weather Service's new capstone effort, and it has its rollouts in, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years from now, and they're already running the initial benchmark runs that incorporate all the different ice, ocean, and atmosphere and land realization. So I suppose in terms of model development, those resources are being captured, but validating the forecasts that you get from those models always requires observations and the work that goes into verifying forecasts. So, I don't know if all of that's being captured, but that's something that we're always striving and struggling to stay on top of.
It's Martin Jeffries here at Krell. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. We've been having some technical problems. I say Jackie Richter-Mengi is here in my office with me, and we were both thinking the same thing simultaneously, wondering if there's anyone on the call from Naval Research Lab, say Rick Allard. We don't see his name in the list, but it would be interesting to get a Naval Research Lab perspective on their model performance relative to these events that we've seen in the Bering Sea, not the least because the Navy models now do a better job of wave ice interactions in the model itself. And that we've been thinking out loud here, Jackie and I, that must have played a big role in the retreat of the ice cover as it was observed just a few weeks ago. Over.
So Janet or Rick, do you have any response to that?
I don't know if Rick is on the line, but Martin, I appreciate you bringing that up because obviously I didn't mention the very large effort that the Navy has in terms of their fully coupled global ice ocean atmosphere model. So that is certainly one of the, at the modeling forefront as well. And yes, the wave ice ocean interactions are something that they've been, they and Environment Canada have been working on. I don't know how that, I imagine that factored in this season to basically churn up the ice and not let it recover, but I don't have any additional information on that.
Hello, this is Florence. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Florence.
Yes.
So I have a question. Janet, you mentioned the importance of validating model forecast with observations, and just on a practical level, how exactly is that done? I mean, I realize there are many ways to do it. There are process studies, there are case studies, but as a group, I'm wondering if maybe there's some possibilities that the people on the call could put forward. How does that happen?
Well, you definitely just described two of the main ways that it happens, which is process studies. Those take a long time after an event has happened. There's, case studies that certainly events go through, and somebody has to really kind of dig into a case study, and that happens as well. But really what we are trying to do, and we're at the very early days of this, or do this kind of rolling verification so that we're learning about the performance of the models in a little bit more near real time. So we're playing around with that, but obviously the satellite information, the IMS information, the fields that we get these kind of routine verification data sets from can just be producing a skill or some information on skill as we go through the forecast all the time. We do that now with drift, and we're looking to extend that with other data sets as well, including ocean and other ocean ones, data sets. But it's something that's definitely in progress, and something that that at least we run a regional coupled model But doing that and then looking at the other models like the Navy model and the Environment Canada model, I mean, that's where we're really starting to learn what the differences are in forecasts and why there are differences.
Thank you. That answers another question I had, which was about comparisons between the various models. And I guess one issue there is that some are regional and some aren't.
Hey, this is Jim on the question of the new normal. Certainly, the Chukchi Sea in the Arctic is in a new normal with the delay of freeze up of at least a month and a half. The change in the Chukchi probably has an influence then on the Bering Sea, but it's still really hard not to give up on natural variability of the jet stream for the Bering Sea, even though we've had 2 counter examples here in the last 2 years.
Yeah, this is Phyllis. I just want to comment a little bit on the validation of the models. Certainly our regional models that are run here, the moorings play an important role in trying to understand mechanistic on how well they do. There's 4 moorings on the Bering Sea shelf, at least there are this year, maybe not next year. And so they have played an important role of looking at the mechanisms of the depth of the mixed layer, the cold pool, and all of that type of thing. And then I'd like to make a comment on what Jim said on the new normal. The southern Bering Sea has had these swings of variability. The most extensive ice year that we have on record is 2012. 6 years later, we had the lowest ice year. And so there's a lot of variability in this system, and trying to understand, the southern Bering Sea certainly seems to have periods of warm, cold, and now has warm. And so what we're seeing on the northern Bering Sea, we may be seeing a similar type of variability, because certainly the southern Bering Sea varies, depends on the northern Bering Sea. You have to freeze the north before you can freeze the south. And so I think there's nuances of patterns, and what causes or stabilizes it for a little bit of time needs to be investigated too.
Another thing from chaos theory is as you approach tipping points, you get a larger excursions, both positive and negative. So if you want to go really woo-woo, you can take Phyllis's comment that we've seen excursions in both directions as an indication that we may be approaching bigger changes, and it's going to be in the next decade, not 30 years from now. And the issue for NOAA is that we're out there measuring every year from the physics through the biology and fisheries.
So this is Molly. Before we maybe move on to biology, the challenge is in terms of getting observational validations is that it's difficult to have real-time sensors on the moorings in the Bering Sea if you have these no ice conditions in the winter. So is there a way technologically of addressing that, or would it be useful to have a glider operating kind of now throughout the winter in the Bering Sea, giving us that some of that data, and you drive the glider in different places depending on the ice conditions?
So, do you want to talk?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So the information I gave about the bottom temperature at St. Matthew Island and the surface, that was done with new technology. It's a pop-up buoy that's set to pop up during the winter It was supposed to come up under the ice, but it didn't. So it did give us a snapshot of what the vertical stratification of temperatures, I think it was salinity and light and a couple things like that. And so that type of technology is a less expensive, less risky way than the glider. Carol Ladd is working with the gliders. Carol, you want to talk about that?
Well, the gliders, it's risky to be under the ice. So, and we have not decided that we're comfortable going very close to the ice yet. So that's an issue that we're working towards. And if it's under the ice, you're not getting data back anyway because it has to surface to come up. And during the winter, I mean, if it's cold out there, it's well mixed. So if we know what's at the surface or at the bottom, then we have pretty much the whole water column. So I mean, I think that the gliders show some promise, but we're not quite there yet, at least on the shelf.
And I think on a real heavy ice event, I think the ice can outrun the glider. It doesn't go very fast, right? On a shallow shelf. And so I think it if you had an event like some years, I mean, the whole Bering Sea shelf has been covered in 30 days, 1,000 kilometers. And so it can move very, very rapidly if the conditions are cold enough. And I think it's faster than the glider can move. So it's a high-risk operation to put them in.
Hi, this is Calvin. You can see me there. I'm on camera. Hey, the other thing we're doing is we're working to deploy.
Can you speak up, Calvin?
Yes, I can. We are, this year we're deploying some new technology that is a sinkable, refloatable mooring. And while we'll have a MET package on before it sinks, it's a sacrificial MET package, but we will get data right up until the ice arrives, and then the mooring will refloat right after ice departs. So we're working towards getting real-time data back in the transition zone between fall and in spring.
Good, good. And I think, Ignatius, did you want to have a comment here?
Yeah, I was just looking at where we have our buoys, and we have 4 surface drifting buoys in the Bering Sea right now. We tried to deploy quite a few from the Healy and some other boats like the Norseman last year. And I have 10 set to go. On the various boats, but we're not going to be able to get them out so that we could, fill the holes in the next couple months. I'd love to know if there's any other boats going out there.
What kind of drifters are these?
These are surface velocity program buoys. These are basically the little ball buoys with drogues that follow the ocean currents. They've got sea surface temperature and barometers on them. Yeah, you basically just pitch them over the side of the boat, and then all the data gets reported on the GTS and shared with everybody.
Yeah, we have. There's more than yours up there. We have some too. Historically, if you ever want to look at them, we probably have about 300 of them over the years up there that show a number of interesting parameters, and temperatures and position is what they record. Ours are drogued at 40 meters.
Yeah, I think ours are at 15 usually. But yeah, I think we'll be putting more out, and as soon as the boats start heading in. But for the next couple months, all our buoys have drifted off to the Russian side of the Bering Sea.
Well, I know one of the things, and there's some other things we want to cover on this call, but one of the things we did last year looking at harmful algal blooms was get all of the research cruises together by phone a couple of times, talking to each other, sharing what their research plans were. And it actually resulted in some enhanced coordination and some enhanced HABs monitoring. So I guess the question to all of you would be, how do you see value in that for the upcoming field season? What are those potential areas for coordination? And there's some that already coordinate pretty well, but I think there were somewhere between 15 to 20 ship cruises last year, and they're not all coordinated. So it seems like that would add value to this entire discussion that we're having today. But I'd like to hear from other people on that, because it took Emily Osborne spent a lot of time trying to get folks together and working with NSF and Renee Crane on their cruise ship planning collaborations. So is there any response on that?
Molly, it's Martin. Jackie and I sitting here listening, and we're commenting while on mute, but one thing that we've been talking about is, there's been a lot of talk here about observations, whether it's gliders, moorings, buoys, whatever. At the risk of being shot down, it's all on a relatively ad hoc basis. There could be more coordination of observations and by platforms and so on. And of course, many of those are deployed by vessel. And that means more vessel coordination, as you say, amongst research projects and others, whoever's got a vessel in the region. And this could be part of maybe a longer term effort. That ENSO was mentioned earlier. So we essentially have an El Nino warning system in the Pacific with the buoys out there in the ocean. And it seems that one thing that comes to mind is perhaps we need some kind of early warning system as part of a coherent, integrated observing system for the Bering Sea. And that's going to require a combination of using the available observations at the moment and models, and using models to help design an observing system. Of course, you've got to have your science questions laid out first. What are your priorities? What do we need to know? Where do we need to know it, and how frequently, and so on. But all this requires coordination, and clearly there's a considerable need for more coordination than is currently going on. And very quickly, that should include the people who live around the rim of the Bering Sea and the Chukchi Sea, and the Beaufort for that matter. Over.
This is Gay. I agree strongly with what Martin just said. When you're coordinating the science, I mean, imagine, and you're looking for observations, imagine the coordination that is not ongoing regarding communications back to regions and back to communities. To have had two back-to-back unprecedented open, serious open water situations, and we're not, that either that prediction is not available to us or is not available to the modelers because of something with the model. There's much exchange of information that needs to take place and that does take place, but even that is not centralized into a place that's accessible for all. So I live out here in a region, we have our own regional communication networks. There are people that try to reroute that or try to say we need to make a new system for everyone, but the system that people are using, I mean, people don't look at what is the system that currently it works for each different region. People don't like to reroute communications to a new system when they have already communications along the coast, if that makes sense. So I agree we need some absolute coordination and accessibility and services provided to the coast, maybe, if that's the right word for it. That would very much greatly enhance people's ability and willingness to communicate and bring you all into the regional communication networks throughout the coast. Thanks.
So I think, Gabe, you bring up a lot of related questions with that, because there are a lot of the research community, I think, who are very who are doing a lot of different pieces of the puzzle. It seems to be no one entity that is responsible for making sure there is this coordination and collaboration, and then getting information back to the communities through using their regional communication networks, but in a consistent, coordinated fashion. So there's kind of at both ends, a coordination of getting the information and then getting that information back to the people who are most affected by it. So maybe I will throw this open to the group. And John, this is kind of leading into your piece as well in terms of information needs. How do we do a better job of both of those pieces of it?
Hey, this is Rick Tolman. I just want to throw in here the information piece. The scale of the information provided has to be considered. The scale of information that the modelers are often working on is a far different scale than the local communities need. And just reporting model results on a pan-Arctic basis to Bering Strait communities is not helpful to them. So any effort at thinking about how to do better at coordination has to consider the scale issues. Thank you.
Molly, it's Martin. If I could, another item Jackie and I have been discussing here is, here we are in IARPC Collaborations Team meeting. So we have feds and non-feds. But do we know whether the feds in Anchorage and/or Washington, D.C., and I'm thinking the different components of NOAA, different components of Department of Interior, Coast Guard, and so on, are they talking already at the agency level about this event and the implications for communities, for people, and the longer term implications? Maybe that's a message from this, that's an action item from this meeting, is to someone find that out.
Well, I can respond just that based on our activities last year, where I think it was pretty much the environmental intelligence team tried to help coordinate some of the response to unprecedented warm conditions and lack of ice last year, and bring that state of the information at both the regional level in Alaska, but also at the national level. It's challenging, and I would say, and I think the problem is there is no one entity that is overall responsible for it. And so everyone looks at it from their particular piece of the puzzle. And the big gap is having that coordination of all of the efforts at both the regional and national level, and then that communication piece. There is just no one entity that is within their mission to do that. And it makes it then challenging to develop that response. And anyone else can jump in, but that's been my perspective and my experience over the last year.
So this is Sarah. I think that this is a really good discussion for staff group, Martin, and maybe we can discuss about when to put that on the agenda. I'm a little sorry that I think Renee Crane has left the call. Renee does head a field operations working group, which has been focused on the principles for conducting research. And now that that is over, has just held its first meeting last week in conjunction with the Environmental Intelligence Collaboration Team. And so I think there is a structure in place for these discussions, but I think it's going to need to be fine-tuned and given some impetus and some direction in order to get it to really focus on these important issues, if indeed IARPC is the right place to have these discussions.
And Sarah, this is Molly. I would respond, yes, these teams are a good forum for it. But again, the purpose is sharing and coordination. It's not that we have the responsibility then for following up and making sure something happens. And that's where it behooves, the responsibility goes to the individual agencies, but they have their individual agency mission. So there needs to be some way still to strengthen that that who is ultimately responsible for ensuring that this happens?
I think it's a great discussion, and Martin, maybe you can jump in, but this sounds like it would be a great discussion for the staff group to have for the feds to try to organize around this a bit.
And this is Gay. I'm just curious, out here in Western Alaska, we work with a diverse set of tribes in the Bering Strait region. We have 3 culturally and linguistically distinct Alaska Native peoples. So our region is very diverse as far as ethnicity, languages, subsistence styles, and timings. I see a lot of federal interest in the Bering Strait region, but and again, I'm kind of ignorant on this one, but what is the level of government to government, other than I'm familiar with the co-management for marine mammals, but as far as working directly with tribes, when you guys are asking for observations or needs, I think a lot of those questions have been dealt with time and time again in meetings with tribal members. And then I am curious, because the follow through on that is it there? So there are relationship building with the tribal entities, or is it just through individual programs? I honestly don't know.
It's Martin. I don't have an answer for Gay to her question, but in response to what Sarah said, I'm thinking if IARPC doesn't do something to at least try and get the agencies talking agency to agency, on who else is going to do it? So ultimately IARPC may not be the right organization for a longer term effort, but at least we could be the catalyst to get something going.
Yeah, and this is John Pierce with USGS, and I guess I would respond, Martin, that there certainly is a lot of it going on, but I think there's always gaps, and there's, in situations like this, in this conversation, we can't quickly respond and say, here's the one group who can find all the answers. Learning about new communication networks, but I would say that it's going on. It's just normal, but I think the conversation should be around how do we document that the conversations are taking place so that people can see that it is happening. There's a number of meetings that take place where communication is exchanged among communities and among agencies at the same time, but maybe that's just.
Yeah, John, this is Molly, and I agree with both you and with Martin in this, that IARPC is certainly, these collaboration teams is certainly a process for getting that conversation and having that initial coordination. Ultimately, if this is going to become the new normal and there is a larger need for this kind of coordinated response effort, then it does possibly call for some new administrative mechanism for ensuring that that happens.
Well, and is that what's planned for the new Arctic Research Policy Act that Murkowski's office has proposed? I mean, there's a number of governance boards that are proposed in that. I just don't know enough about it, but it seemed like that was going to have a lot of representation of different groups across the state, but I don't know if it's going to be part of that or not.
I don't know. Maybe someone else has an answer to that.
But anyway, just, for example, in early April, the Alaska Migratory Bird Co-Management Council is meeting, and a lot of these topics will be brought up there, and those are representatives from across the state of communities and agencies. So there'll be government to government conversation, there's state to federal, there's community to federal. So those are the kind of things that I think are not well known, and maybe which need to find a way to document them and to make the minutes of those meetings more visible.
This is Gay. That's an excellent point.
This is Jim. Maybe Rick or John want to comment on this, but in December, we were going into a normal ice year, and I don't know anyone in middle of January that was actually predicting that February would turn out the way it did.
Right, and that's a great point too that that I was going to bring up in my part, which I think we've sort of incorporated in here. But when things change rapidly, that's the big question for me in a broad sense. What's the best way to communicate when things are so rapid and unpredicted? So as this case in the Bering is being discussed. So how do we rapidly communicate that, rapidly provide information, and what's the best format to do that, and what's the frequency in which we provide that information and receive it too?
Hey, this is Rick. So your point's taken, although certainly the monthly leads from CPC had above normal temperatures. That's not necessarily related to storminess, but the pattern change in late January was well forecast by the weather scale models. And perhaps if we would have been more sensitive to not just a whole bunch of red on the ice extent map analysis, but rather if we'd have been more cognizant of this ice is likely very thin, that even if it would have just been, 2 weeks of stormy weather, we could have anticipated substantial retreat of the ice edge if we would have been maybe more thinking about, well, yes, there's ice, but it's very thin ice.
But we're still talking about a 2-week forecast, not a month or two forecast.
And it appears that to really push the ice back, you need closer to 3 or 4 weeks of winds out of the south. 2 weeks, it's the variability we see a lot of the time. Yeah.
So, Gay, maybe what kind of information or what kind of services do you feel that the coastal constituency is getting now, the regional communities? You hear from, is it from Weather Service? Is it from, what kind of things do you get now? Anything?
Hi, I couldn't unmute there. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yeah, now we can.
Okay. So what are the services that we receive now? Well, we have the online services, certainly with the National Weather Service. I think the National Weather Service and UAF, ACCAP. I mean, Rick Toman has been, when this occurred and we had such a amazing disappearance of the ice yet again, and knowing that the difficulties that we had last year with not just, I can appreciate that man who was talking about the Guillemot colony, that's gone down dramatically, but we've had bird die-offs for which we've never seen the types of things like a failure to lay eggs along the south side of St. Lawrence Island for the MERS and things. Very, very minimal egg laying. The services were provided, I guess, in such a state was, I picked up the phone and asked Rick Toman, people here are getting worried. We're not able to move, literally, in the airplanes during January and February, and we're looking at an amazing and astounding loss of sea ice, which we know that thermal barrier is going to be weakened. And after what we experienced in 2018, is this what we're going to be faced with again? This is on a lot of people's minds. We have 20 tribes squished into 15 communities. There's 30,000 people on either side of the, combined on either side of the Bering Strait. And he just, I just picked up the phone and asked a tribe, how are you guys doing? Do you want to hear from Rick Toman? He's made himself available, and there isn't one community that said no thank you. And so he's been talking directly with the tribal leadership, And that has been a really great service as far as people being able to, at the leadership role in a community, to be able to better, you know, the leaders of a community are also asked a lot of questions, and for them to have such a sort of a main line into the best predictions that UAF can provide has been really welcome. In that, I don't know, Rick, you can speak to that, but you've also in return been given some information that may be of use. Other services, boy, we haven't really heard, at least I haven't, and I'm Alaska Sea Grant / UAF, so I'm quasi NOAA. I haven't heard anybody from the wildlife side of the house contacting up here to say, you know, do they have any data that might be useful to people, like, or of interest to people? But maybe that'll come in those meetings.
Well, certainly that's Fish and Wildlife Service, it's Fish and Game, it's USGS, it's those who have management responsibilities. So right now you are not hearing from anyone, is that correct?
Not personally, no. I try to get into meetings so I can hear what's happening. I know we have a field season coming up. I know people aren't up here and they don't, you know, they're looking for information. What would be useful is some predictions, maybe regarding what might happen with seabirds, and or if there are events like a seal die-off or a seabird die-off or strange fish, this would be a good time to sort of make sure that that the agencies are tapped into the regional communication network, such that when people in COERIC or people at Sea Grant, people in any transportation hub, the North Slope Borough Department of Wildlife Management, Bristol Bay Native Association, are the agencies do they have a good bridge to get at the people in those transportation hubs that will have eyes out throughout the season for some of the information that may be useful? In the transportation hubs, you bet we are gearing up to remind people where to report, when to report, and we fully anticipate a sort of like I say, we're hoping for the best, that everything's going to be great, but we're preparing for what we experienced last year. And last year, you know, we're responding at the hub level basically alone. No biologists come out. It's very rare. We're asked to send a lot of things in or report what we see. So we're trying to strengthen that, but we could use all the help we can get. Thanks.
Anyone have comments to that?
It's Martin again. Late in the Obama administration, President Obama signed an executive order for the Northern Bering Sea Climate Resilience Region, and a group of us federally got on top of that really quite quickly and formed a working group that then started consulting with the tribes and corporations in the region. And we were doing really quite well. And Joel Clement is on the line still, perhaps, and he was part of this when he was at Interior. Our work came to a screeching halt because the executive order was rescinded. If that executive order was still in operation, as it were, then perhaps we wouldn't be having the kind of discussion we're having now, because there'd already be a group that would be coordinating, a fed, non-fed coordination group for this very region. But that's not to cry over spilt milk, but that doesn't mean that we can't put a group together anyway. You don't need an executive order. And we already have IARPC that could at least start something off and get something moving. And even if somebody else takes responsibility for it, but you don't need a particular agency. We already have agencies that talk, and we have phones and email, and connections and calls can be made very quickly.
Hey, Martin, this is Joel. Just to add to that, I think you're spot on. There's no reason this needs to be a top-down thing from the White House necessarily. And from what I understand, Senator Murkowski's in the process of rewriting that executive order as legislation. Who knows what sort of hope it would have in Congress. But even prior to that, there's nothing wrong with setting up a proof of concept, like you said. I think it'd be fantastic to have a need-based network set up for connecting resources to needs, and on top of that, using the opportunity to really identify region and location-specific needs. So I think that'd be a very fruitful opportunity to collaborate with this group.
This is Audrey Taylor. I'm the president of the board for the Arctic Research Consortium of the U.S. And this is a topic that we have been talking about extensively, about this issue of connecting to communities and getting information back in a timely fashion. And this is something that I think we as a research connecting entity would be really interested in working further on. So I don't know if that would be a starting point in terms of figuring out what's actually needed, what would be helpful, what communication tools and techniques really work to get information back, and then utilizing those in the context of what's going on in the Bering Sea. I think we would be really interested in helping with that effort.
Thanks, Audrey. Any other comments from folks?
This is Gay. I think you guys are going in the right direction. We have, you know, the coast, I don't know even about the interior, but the coast of Alaska is set up into regions for political, ethnic, and financial differences and governmental differences. And so I do think that if you're able to work with the small communities, look to the transportation hubs on the West Coast, Utqiagvik, Kotzebue, Nome, Bethel, Dillingham, Unalaska. Each one of those is very separate, but they deal with many, many communities around them. When we, within the transportation hubs, we wear many hats, all of us, and we're small enough, we all kind of know each other. Then we have to look elsewhere for information. All of the federal presence, with the exception of the Post Office, FAA, and the Park Service, are in urban-based centers. So we are trying to, you know, if there's a way to capture going from the tiny communities to the hubs to the urban-based and look at the system, how it works and where it can be strengthened. I mean, I think we already are kind of, just by default, even with this group here, we're working the system as we can and with what we have. I think strengthening that would be terrific. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gay. Well, we're actually past time, and I know we're going to start losing people. So maybe we could sum up some action items as a result of this. And Kelly, who is now a Sea Grant person working with IARPC, Kelly Ulick. But I know one of the things that sounds like it would be useful would be to compile what do we know that's happening now, what do we expect to happen this season, and get that into some kind of an informational document that we could distribute broadly, working with Gay, with you and with others, communities, and making sure that it's in a way that's easily understandable to the non-scientist and includes local observations. That would be one definite thing that we could do. Another would be to set up a working group on how do we develop a system that's similar in a way that replicates the Northern Bering Sea EO, and what kind of structure. And I heard Audrey Taylor say that the ARCIS is interested in that. I don't know, Joel, if from your position now at the Harvard Arctic think tank, if that's something you would be interested in, or someone from your group, anyone else, I'd be happy to help follow up and get that group meeting together and thinking about this. That sounds like that's another follow-up item. And then the third thing would be coordinating the cruises for the upcoming season, similar to what we did last year. And that would be, I think, working with Renee Crane and with the Arctic Logistics Group, working group, and trying to make sure that it was expansive to include not just NSF, but all of the research cruises there, and have that So those are three things that action items that I could see coming out of this. That's what I've heard. I don't know if you have any other suggestions.
Molly, count me in for that. This is Joel. That sounds like a good call on that piece anyway.
Molly, yeah, I think those were the big three that I had written down as well.
Hey, Molly, this is Ann Garland. How are y'all? I would like to also, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay. I just want to throw in the fact that I work with emergency managers, and so don't exclude that aspect of this risk-related, I'm calling it a risk network, I guess. We have started something called an Arctic Risk Management Network already through ARES and the North Slope Borough Emergency Managers across the U.S. and Canada Arctic Emergency Managers. So if there's anything that we can do or contribute or collaborate, please keep us informed.
This is Gay. Does that include south of the North Slope Borough, your emergency plan?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. We had U.S. Embassy funding for it. We're in the process of hopefully finally submitting a NSF proposal. I'm actually going to be talking to Peter in a few minutes, Peter Pulsifer, who's been part of it, we have some funding for different particular hazards, like with coastal risk hazards right now with Alaska Sea Grant. If you look up the current research under their headings, you'll see ARMNet, Arctic Risk Management Network. It's really focused on a particular kind of hazard. But the ARMNet is actually for all hazards. The concept that we began back in 2015 with U.S. Embassy funds is just trying to find a way to implement it, as is always.
So this is Gay. I guess I'll close out with saying thanks for having me come along to this. And we haven't discussed the biology of and the ecology of what it means to the Bering Strait region and the northern Bering Sea. If, as Phyllis says, we're going to lose what little cold pool there is, that thermal barrier, and this region is hit again with the animals from the south. I think that the northern Bering Sea fed everybody last year at the detriment of our own species like birds and young marine mammals. And having that occur twice in a row is going to be, we're all a little bit nervous about how this is going to play out regarding our resources and what that means, sort of the physicalness of the ocean, the biology. I mean, we're talking sort of the transformative shift here going on, and it's happening right now. It'd be lovely if the ice came back, but I kind of don't see that, and neither do our communities. Don't feel very strong that all is well and that the ice will come back. So I guess hopefully this sort of comprehensive severity of our position should be of interest. I think, Kelly, I saw something where you wrote, what does it take to have a state of Alaska declare a disaster? For subsistence, it takes something we don't have in place. So anyway, thank you for letting me say that, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Gay. And I really want to reiterate our appreciation for your helping develop the agenda and some of the questions for this. And I know we didn't answer all of them. This is a starting conversation again, but I think you can tell that there is a lot of interest and support and concern about trying to be more responsive and really get more ahead of the issue instead of being reactive to things. So really look forward to your participating and helping to guide this forward. And so I think we have some action items following up on this. The IARPC team, Kelly and Sarah and others this is recorded, and it's also notes are being taken, so those will be distributed. And then we will be following up with groups to make sure those action items actually happen. So any other closing comments from anyone? Hearing none, again, thank you all for participating today, and we'll be talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Great call.